This is the Capitol Rundown.
We're striving to get back to zero, not to have grown our economy like she's touting. It's disingenuous. Let's look at the numbers of people employed before we had COVID.
This is about their choice, not a bunch of politicians deciding what's best for them.
They're spending more time focusing on that than they are focusing on the supply chain crisis when it comes to baby formula, which is a crisis hurting babies and families across this country.
So this abortion issue not only affects the women in this country from a personal standpoint, but from a political standpoint, it also has implications, and it could determine who is the next state attorney general.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Lauren Thompson. Yet another big week here in Michigan politics, and attention is quickly turning to the midterm elections next November. From alleged fraud within James Craig's campaign to infighting in the Republican Party to the divisive issue of abortion. It's shaping up to be an intense few months ahead. We start this morning with our Tim Skubic, who's here with Kiera Lake to break it all down for us.
Now let's start with the gubernatorial campaign, and we're hearing about possible fraud involving these signatures needed to get on the August primary ballot. What are you hearing?
We have Mark Brewer, who's the former state Democratic Party chair, alleging that in the case of the candidacy of Republican candidate for Governor James Craig, he did not allegedly file enough valid petition signatures to get on the ballot in August. He needed to turn in 15,000. The Craig campaign says they turned in over 21,000. What's the problem? Brewer says there's a lot of forgeries. That's what the problem is, and you shouldn't be on the ballot. Now, the lawyers for Mr. Craig have filed a complaint and a rebuttal, if you will, with the state, 3 days late, by the way. But they filed basically and said that, yeah, maybe there was some forgery, but it certainly wasn't enough to knock this gentleman off of the ballot. Now, another name, Perry Johnson, is also part of these allegations of alleged forgery in turning in his signatures. Obviously, his campaign is dismissing this. His campaign manager called it basically plain politics and trying to basically defraud Mr. Johnson from getting on the ballot. His attorney says not one single forgery has been found. And of course, the attorneys that filed the suit, the Democratic attorneys that filed suit against Mr. Johnson, say just the opposite. Now, how do we resolve all of this is the good question. The State Board of Canvassers on May the 26th will sit down and try to sort through all of these allegations. Brewer, by the way, says he turned in over 200 pages of proof that there was forgery. And so the canvassers will decide. If they decide enough valid signatures were turned in, these two gentlemen, two Republicans, will be on the ballot. If not, they'll find something else to do this summer because they'll be off the ballot, and that would be unprecedented. It would be huge and would change the entire dynamics in the race for governor on the Republican side. Huge story here.
All right, Tim, and staying on the topic of elections, now we're seeing Republicans battling with Republicans over the impact of Donald Trump in our state. Now, what's the big deal? What's the debate about?
Yeah, well, here's the deal. If you're an incumbent Republican member of the Michigan House, the tradition is you don't get a primary opponent. You get to take basically the summer off and do whatever you want to do. Play golf, go to the cottage, take the kids to the fair, do whatever you can, you can slide through. Well, as it turns out, there are 19 Republican incumbents who find themselves not in that boat, but in a completely different boat. They have opponents, and many of them are supported by Donald Trump, which means you've got a little battle going on in the House Republican caucus over Trump candidates versus regular incumbent candidates, and it can get ugly, and it is ugly. And the bottom line is Democrats are sitting back and watching all of this and going, wow, there must be a God, and she must be a Democrat, because this really plays into our hands. And so you've got an internal struggle going on with the Republicans who should be focusing on the Democrats, but now instead they're focusing on each other. Another huge political story.
And Tim, earlier this week, we learned that the House voted to put term limits on the ballot. Now, what does that mean for lawmakers here across Michigan?
Well, for years, 1992 was the day that Michigan voters said yes to term limits, and Michigan has some of the most stringent term limits in the nation. What the Michigan House and Senate did this week was they put on the ballot for voters to decide in November some changes to the term limit law. basically saying that if you want to serve 12 years in the Michigan House consecutively, you would be able to do that under this new proposal. Now, the original backers of term limits say this is a fraud itself and is wrong, but it's on the ballot. Voters will have to decide. And in addition to changing the term limit law, for the first time, they are putting some more, not stringent, but more reporting requirements of all representatives and lawmakers and governors and people like that to disclose where their finances are coming from. So it's a two-pronged effort that will be on the ballot in November.
Another topic that we want to talk about that's been big across the nation are abortion rights. And we do know that the elections are coming up, but what would this mean specifically for the Attorney General race?
Very, very good question. That could be one of the central issues in the AG's race, featuring Democrat Dana Nessel, who is very much pro-choice, and Matt DePerno, who is the Republican and Donald Trump supported candidate for Attorney General, who is on the opposite side of the issue. This will come down to if indeed the U.S. Supreme Court tosses out Roe v. Wade, and we don't know that for sure, it is speculation, but let's assume that they do. The question politically is, will more Democrats be motivated to vote because of that, or will more Republicans be motivated to vote? We simply do not know until we count noses on Election Day. But the polling data seems to suggest it gives a bit of an edge to the Democrats on voter turnout. So this abortion issue not only affects the women in this country from a personal standpoint, but from a political standpoint, it also has implications, and it could determine who is the next state attorney general.
Thank you both. Well, coming up next here on The Rundown, speaking of the November elections, we continue our series this morning, introducing you to the Republicans hoping to earn their party's nomination to challenge Governor Whitmer in the fall. Hear from Kevin Rinke. The Capitol Rundown comes right back. Welcome back. The 2022 governor's race is right around the corner, and a record number of Republicans are challenging Governor Gretchen Whitmer this year. This week, The Rundown caught up with another one of those candidates, Kevin Rinke. Listen in as he shares his top priorities.
The first thing that we have to do is look at the people in Michigan. And I introduced a proposal that under a Rinke governorship, that we would eliminate the personal income tax of 4.25%. That shrinking Michigan government on January 1, 2024 by $11.7 billion and putting the people's money back in their pocket, because I happen to think that families in Michigan know how to spend their money better than the government of Michigan knows how to spend it. And all of these families are experiencing the highest inflation we've had in 40 years, runaway costs with fuel, with food, with baby formula. And here we have government in Michigan taxing us at one of the highest rates of any state in our country. And I believe in smaller government that's efficient. I have faith in the people that they will spend their money, which will be taxed, by the way, when they spend it, as they say they need it. You know, we've got a governor that says she believes in kitchen table ideas. And my response to that is, with the environment she's created, the kitchen table's bare, the kitchen's cold because people can't afford the heat, and people are out of jobs. And don't tell me that Michigan's come back, because Michigan hasn't come back. We're striving to get back to zero, not to have grown our economy like she's touting. It's disingenuous. Let's look at the numbers of people employed before we had COVID, and then let's look at them today. And when you count and use the exact same figures, Michigan is one of the least productive states in our country.
Well, don't go anywhere, because after the break, we head to the state capitol, where lawmakers were busy this week tackling some big issues. We'll take a look at some of the newest legislation making its way through the House and Senate when the Capitol Rundown comes right back. Republicans in the State House are working to get rid of the state's Citizen Redistricting Commission. That commission was created by voters in a constitutional amendment to take over the job of redrawing congressional districts after every U.S. Census. Previously, lawmakers themselves were responsible for drawing the voting districts, but that led to accusations of gerrymandering. Many Republicans were opposed to the Citizens Commission even before it was created, and now 3 of them have introduced a joint resolution that would return power over voting district maps to the legislature. This comes after the commission generated controversy by improperly entering closed session with its attorneys. The resolution has been referred to the State House Committee on Elections and Ethics. A new bipartisan bill in Lansing would make sure that mandatory reporters are well equipped to help protect young people across our state. Michigan law requires people in specific jobs like teachers, coaches, and social workers to report any known or suspected child abuse or neglect. Under this new bill, those mandatory reporters would have to undergo approved training twice a year. It would cover how to spot child abuse and neglect and what their obligations are under the law. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Families, Children, and Seniors. A bill designed to crack down on recreational use of nitrous oxide made its way out of the Committee on Judiciary and is now headed to the full state Senate for a vote. This bill would ban the sale of objects that are specifically designed to help people inhale nitrous oxide, also known as whippets. Violations could result in a 90-day jail sentence and a $5,000 fine. Professionals, though, that have legitimate uses for nitrous oxide, like doctors and dentists, would be exempt from the ban. Well, in some Ukraine news, a confirmation hearing was held on Tuesday for Michigan native Bridget Brink, who's been nominated to be the next ambassador to Ukraine. Brink, who grew up in East Grand Rapids, has spent her career in the U.S. Senior Foreign Service and is currently the U.S. ambassador to Slovakia. She was nominated to be ambassador to Ukraine last month after the Russian invasion. Michigan U.S. Senator Gary Peters introduced Brink on Tuesday. He says she's well qualified for the position and would be a good representative of Michigan's values in this critical role. Well, speaking of Michigan women, the Senate confirmed Michigan State University economist Lisa Cook to serve on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. It was a party line vote with the tie broken by Vice President Kamala Harris. Cook is the first black woman to serve in the 108-year history of the Fed's Board of Governors. The first black man on the board, Andrew Brimmer, was also a Spartan. He was an assistant professor in MSU's Department of Economics. Well, there's a lot more to come here this morning. Up next, it was a controversial vote in the U.S. Senate this week to make the right to an abortion federal law. We'll have the latest from lawmakers after it didn't garner enough support. Stay with us. The fate of abortion rights hangs in the balance as many Democrats emphasize the importance of those rights. Our Washington correspondent Basil John reports on a bill that Democrats are pushing.
Ahead of an expected Supreme Court ruling, Wednesday, Senate Democrats made a doomed attempt to protect abortion rights.
Few questions are more personal, more private, and more complicated than those involving a pregnancy.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says it's important for lawmakers to stand against conservative Supreme Court justices.
If the Supreme Court follows through on that decision, it will be the greatest contraction of individual rights in generations.
Vice President Kamala Harris is disappointed with the outcome.
Sadly, the Senate failed to stand in defense of a woman's right to make decisions about her own body.
Michigan Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow says it's important to trust women in America.
And this is about their choice, not a bunch of politicians deciding what's best for them.
But Republicans like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and South Dakota Senator John Thune reject the bill.
It ignores modern science. It is tone deaf to public opinion.
The American people don't even come close to supporting abortion on demand up until the moment of birth.
New York Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik says abortion isn't what Democrats should focus on.
They're spending more time focusing on that than they are focusing on the supply chain crisis when it comes to baby formula, which is a crisis hurting babies and families across this country.
Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
Well, still ahead here on the Capitol Rundown, we head back to Washington for the latest update in the wake of the January 6th unrest at our nation's capital last year. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol took the unprecedented steps Thursday afternoon of issuing subpoenas for testimony from 5 of their own colleagues. Scott McFarland has more details from D.C.
This is a new high watermark for this House Select January 6th committee, which has already completed about 1,000 interviews. They've now issued subpoenas to 5 of their own colleagues. 5 high-profile members of the House Republican Conference, including Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California. The committee says McCarthy spoke to Donald Trump before, during, and after the U.S. Capitol attack. Subpoenas for Ohio's Jim Jordan and Pennsylvania's Scott Perry, both of whom the committee says sent text messages to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in the hours and days before the Capitol riot. Andy Biggs of Arizona, who according to the committee was part of the planning to block the Electoral College count from Arizona on January 6th, and Mo Brooks of Alabama, who gave a fiery speech outside the White House ellipse just before President Trump spoke on January 6th. All now facing subpoenas. According to the committee, all have declined to speak voluntarily. It's unclear what leverage the committee has to enforce this subpoena. When asked today about how he'd do so, House Select January 6 Committee Chairman Benny Thompson told CBS News he hopes they show up, he expects they'll show up, but the future for these subpoenas is a bit unclear. The committee has a deadline. Their opening for their first public hearing is set for June 9th. Scott McFarland, CBS News, Washington.
Well, that's the Capitol Rundown for this week. We hope to see you again next weekend.